Welcome back, everyone. Today, I've just got to get us started off with a quote, so here goes. You have to earn the right to monetize. I truly believe that. If people want to support this title, they have the option, but we are never forcing anyone to do so. And that's really the quote that rung out. You have to earn the right to monetize. And these words come from the CEO of Arrowhead, Johan Pilestedt, and these are in response to thanks. Thanks from players of Helldivers 2. And that's an interesting game because it's the first live service title that's been launched under PlayStation's ongoing but recently cut down live service plan. And as this game is blowing up in player counts and the internet's becoming more and more flooded with memes and reviews and captured footage that's very bombastic and cool looking, well, let's check in whether Helldivers 2 and Arrowhead have actually done the work. How much they have or have not earned the right to monetize, as their CEO has indeed put it. Now, I would like to think that slowly that is something that we are more and more doing, and well, here's the deal. We publish exclusive content on bellular.ghost.io. Over there, you'll get access to Loading Screen. That's our daily newsletter. You'll get reports like this one before I even see the report, and of course, early and ad-free access to our videos, and of course, the Members Lounge. And honestly, here, the deal is pretty simple. Ad revenue per 1,000 views is down quite a lot compared to where it used to be for us. So, essentially, in return for your support, I am trying as hard as I can to lead our team in a responsible fashion, and of course to make our content better, to make it more consistent. Basically what we do here is our mission, and well, as my end of the bargain, I endeavor to make as much progress as I can with your support. So thank you. The link is down below. And with that said, let's get stuck into Helldivers, a game that honestly I am very excited to jump into. So what is Helldivers 2? Well, first up, it comes from Arrowhead. They're actually pretty damn notable because they were responsible for Magicka, which, while not one of the earliest, like, pretty big indie games, it was definitely there in the earlier cohorts. So they did that. And then you had Helldivers 1 coming out in 2015. It looks very different to Helldivers 2, though, because it is a isometric twin-stick co-op shooter, where essentially you are, well, the titular Helldivers, who are, you know, fighting bugs on behalf of Super Earth to defend democracy. The satire is great. There's obviously a lot of inspiration from Starship Troopers. And on launch on the PS3, PS4, and the Vita, big rip, people basically loved it. It did really well, and it actually became the first Sony-published game on the PC, well, 9 months after. Helldivers 2 is all of that, but, well, it's definitely a lot higher budget, and I suppose similar to with the previous exclusive Returnal, there is very much a step up as we're moving into the PS5. An isometric game has turned into a third-person shooter, of course taking advantage of the PS5 to, well, have very large hordes of bugs. So in a sense, Helldivers 2 is kind of merging the new with the old. It's taking inspirations from its twin-stick original self, I think likely taking some inspirations from, say, the feeling of some Gears of War and that kind of thing, and it's wrapping it up in a very novel package with, I would say, pretty damn genius, like, macro narrative design. It's really strong. Now, pre-launch, there were some concerns. This was going to be a simultaneous launch on the PC and the PS5, but would not be a simultaneous launch was the reviews, because there were, in fact, no pre-launch reviews for Helldivers 2. That is certainly something that does spook people. Now, there's no suggestion that we could find that Sony were essentially like blacklisting people or anything like that, but essentially it dropped without reviews. There wasn't a humongous amount of before launch coverage, and to a degree, this does kind of make sense. I mean, if you're reviewing a big online multiplayer game, but you know, you can't really do the whole online multiplayer thing because it's pre-release. That's obviously not going to be ideal for reviews. Perhaps they wanted to avoid that. But certainly, for a lot of people, well, yeah, it did set a few alarm bells ringing. And while those alarm bells were going off, we were then hit by some technical concerns. Arrowhead basically announced that there would be kernel-level anti-cheat as a part of this game on PC. Now, typically, kernel-level anti-cheat is something that's only really brought out for games where competitive integrity is extremely important. The likes of, you know, Valorant. Call of Duty, of course, suffered from a very, very large cheating problem, so they went for kernel-level anti-cheat as well. So a lot of people would say then, well, why does a PvE game actually need this? Is it too much? Now, that's actually stuff that the developers have spoken to. So Peter Lindgren, who is their technical director, basically talked about balance and that kind of thing, saying that shortly after release with Helldivers 1, they noticed a cheat going around that granted 9,900 999 research samples. But any non-cheaters in the same mission would also be granted those research samples. And that essentially meant that the people who didn't cheat, because they were put in a party with people who did cheat, they then had their entire progression ruined through no fault of their own, and it bypassed the intended design. So that's essentially why they're trying to do that. I don't think it's 100% necessary, but I can see from their perspective, it's like, okay, look, there's a big gun, it has a pretty high chance of success, we shall just use the big gun and take our success, because not using the big gun is a lot harder, and it just opens up a big nightmare for us when we're already going to be busy managing a live game. Of course, thinking about how we started today's video, it's with that quote from the CEO. So how do you kind of match what he is saying with this being, the live service games model? So Helldivers 2 both is and is not a typical live service title, and that's where it's interesting. So it has a battle pass. It's called the Warbond system, which I suppose is a pretty good, macro narrative way to do a battle pass, just saying it's a war bond. But these basically require to use another currency called medals. Those are earned through completing missions, daily missions. They can also be found in missions as loot, where there's some risk reward there. Now, these bonds are working on a progression model in that there will be a selection of cosmetics, emotes, premium currency, and weapons to unlock, and the first one is free to everybody on launch. Now, here's the bit that I think is really the detail that makes all the difference. They're borrowing something from Halo Infinite, where war bonds don't expire. The battle pass doesn't expire. It is essentially a matter of, unlocking what you would like and then working towards it, which does actually mean if you put money into a war bond, it's not going to be deleted, which obviously is something that sucks. Imagine you say buy an Overwatch 2 battle pass, life gets in the way, and you basically feel like you have been completely screwed in a way that does feel profoundly unfair. The idea that you are buying something and then it just kind of gets taken away. And I would say it also causes a problem for the Overwatch developers in progression. What if you finish the current season and you're like, okay, well, I kind of want to play more Overwatch, but I've ran out of extrinsically motivated rewards because of how this system works. Well, in a game like Helldivers or Halo Infinite, you could just load up a previous battle pass that you bought. I would certainly have to wonder, though, is that something that Blizzard doesn't do because they would rather, say, take something from QuestWatch and then recycle it into the store where they can make, comparatively a lot more money off it. Yeah, maximizing revenue probably does come in the way of a good and fair design for most players. Now, this game does also have a premium currency that you can purchase with real money. They're called Super Credits. Yeah, Super Credits for Super Earth. 150 for $1.99 and 2,100 for $19.99. But you can actually find the premium currency as loot fairly rarely in the middle of missions, and the developers have estimated at launch that it's earnable at a rate of 10 to 40 Super Credits an hour, and the premium battle pass costs 1,000 Super Credits, while an individual cosmetic item, like say a helmet, a cape, armor options, those are between 75 and 250 in a rotating shop. Now, if you're going to be earning, let's just say 25 an hour, that actually does mean that some of those cosmetics are readily within your purchase range by just playing the game. Obviously, this is something you could then, and look, I'm not trying to wail on Overwatch 2, it's one of the stories that I think more people understand. It's what immediately comes to mind for me. Now, I'm sure you remember how the currency, at least initially at launch, your premium currency unlocked via the weekly challenges, it was so slow that it would take 9 months or something like that to purchase a legendary skin, and to people that just felt absolutely ghoulish. It does seem here that that is not the case. Beyond that, then, there's some other upgrade currencies that are used to upgrade your abilities, but those are something that is earned via gameplay. So as far as a live service goes, right, there are premium cosmetics, but it does seem that they are not disproportionately, but as compared to some other live services, they are a bit more generous with how that premium currency can be earned in-game. Yes, they do have a battle pass. That is a battle pass, though, that doesn't expire. So if you are doing a battle pass, that absolutely is the gold standard way to do one. Now, there has been some concern about the war bonds because there are weapons in the war bonds, right? So in a war bond, you can get different versions of core weapons. Now, some people would worry that these are a pay-to-win thing. Ultimately, they have slightly different stats, but they're not necessarily better than the free war bond weapons. And of course, they all still have to be unlocked using the medals that are earned through gameplay, so it's not like you can just immediately go and buy a gun. Now, this is where we're going to go back to Johan's comments on earning the right to monetize, and he's essentially arguing that it's not pay-to-win for that reason. So he responds to this tweet, pay-to-win in Helldivers 2, you can actually play the damn game to earn super credits, lol. Again, people just saying shit, so that is somebody responding to the concerns. He then responds to that saying, I'm partial, but we really applied ourselves to not make it pay-to-win even though items are functionally different. The only item that's pay-to-win is the revolver, which you can win any cool gun competition. Only minor problem is it's not that good. So kind of making the joke that like, yeah, look, we're going to sell you a fancy looking revolver, but it's not like it's going to be better. But of course, in a world where you're actually earning a decently meaningful amount of that premium currency via regular ass gameplay, I think to people that's going to be a more reasonable sort of thing. So as an example, for earning the medals currency, like that's done via, in one case, the daily challenges. As an example, one of those is just killing 200 bugs, which is very much something you're going to be doing in this game anyway. As for the other things, right? So any season that comes from Helldivers 2 is essentially a always-on campaign that sees the available player base trying to complete missions on the same planets, and essentially it's like a big population-wide goal. And when you complete that population-wide goal, say liberating a planet, everybody playing will, of course, be getting rewards. So essentially, the monetization is simply unlocking some other ways to progress or cosmetics. It's all quite geared towards just playing the game. And overall, from everything that I've looked at, opinions seem fairly reasonable. I mean, the overall design here, like, you don't play a dude, right? The thing you're upgrading is your ship, your armory. It's not like you're upgrading your dude's weapon, you're upgrading the armory of your ship to have that better weapon, because whenever your dude dies in Helldivers, that's canonical, and another one hell dives in from your ship. Yeah, a bit of 40k, bit of Starship Troopers. I think it's overall a pretty neat way of doing it, and the way that they're kind of doing their campaign, where, you'll go to a planet, you'll go to a sector in the planet, you'll actually be able to join into somebody else's mission via that UI. I think it's just an overall framing that is really, really smart. And again, remember, this is like a $40 game. This isn't a full $70 situation. Like, say, let's think about Ubisoft and Skull and Bones, a game that's, of course, coming out pretty much any time right now. I believe by the time you see this video, you'll be able to pay, $100 or whatever it is for the premium version of Skull and Bones to play it a few days early. And that's an example of very much, live servicey game, $70, then monetization, whereas this is sailing in at, I think, $40. And in terms of value proposition, from looking about the place, it really does seem to be great. Now, all that's well and good, but what happens if your launch is a little bit of a disaster, which unfortunately for this team, it was. I'll quickly go over things, but basically you were dealing with pretty 50-50, like very, very mixed Steam reviews. People were having matchmaking not work with anyone but friends, crossplay breaking the game, progression not being logged, and of course, whether you actually get into the game at all, that was also a pretty dicey affair. So what happened is the team basically firefought here throughout the weekend. They ended up increasing the cap on their server. So initially, them and their service provider were planned for 250,000 concurrent players. They upgraded that to 360,000 concurrent players, but as soon as that upgrade was done, well, they went straight up to that cap of players. You can see the peak player count in Steam was just shy of 200,000. You've then got to remember how many people actually have PS5s and will have been playing this game. So yes, absolutely, this is a humongous success of a launch in raw player numbers, but certainly not in sentiment because of all of these problems. Now, the thing is, what happens if you have been firefighting all weekend? Well, they essentially had to explain this. For now, please once again accept our sincere apologies for the issues you're facing, and rest assured we're doing our utmost to make it right. In order to do so right now, it is crucial that our team gets some sleep, and we will be back at this again in a few hours. So you're literally getting to the point now where those human factors on the team, those are playing in, where people just need to get like 6 hours of sleep in order to do anything useful. I suppose the development team are maybe getting a little bit too close to the satire of their game for comfort with that. But as we're coming into this week, it is turning out that audiences are feeling willing to forgive the game for all of that. We are now at 75% on Steam, where we were more like 50-50. And ultimately, we're seeing that people do kind of love Helldivers 2, to the point where this is in fact the biggest launch PlayStation have ever had on PC. That is honestly quite massive. Like, you had the likes of, say, God of War, I think Horizon as well. Like, they have had big launches, but for this to be the biggest, I think makes, well, it's a big deal, but it also does make, I think, a fairly interesting point. So, number one, we're seemingly not seeing a cannibalization of the PlayStation sales. I think for a game like this, that does actually make quite a lot of sense. I think a little bit different to a very single-player experience. Like, you're just going to want to buy access to this game and play it with people, so the network effect afforded to you by just having crossplay and it being on more devices, that's just plainly a useful thing. But also, $40! $40. So it's $40 for a systems-driven, gameplay-focused experience with very dynamic, varied gameplay as you're playing different maps, different objectives. It's got a core game design that I think just naturally lends itself to making very, social media spreadable moments, even down to things like how they're, how they're approaching friendly fire. At the same time, we're seeing monetization that doesn't feel egregious to the audience, and that's just meant that loads of people are playing this damn game. And even though the servers right now are they're visibly strained, people are broadly speaking pretty damn happy. So I think it just goes to show what matters to an audience and what sorts of things an audience is kind of willing to forgive if a developer is open about what they're doing, open about those human factors, and when it comes to monetization and things like that, is actually being fairly reasonable. I mean, if this is a game that had, say, 4-day early access for a $80 or $70 like digital deluxe edition, and then you had these server problems, that would just not set a good tone for the game. And to be honest, that's the kind of thing that Diablo 4 ran into, where, yes, like its first season, which obviously did come a bit later, but its first season, it had some problems. People already felt like it was a pretty expensive launch. People were surprised, I think, about some of the stuff in the store, and that just led to a community sentiment that was not going to be super forgiving to Blizzard, whereas here, I think they've managed a lot of those soft factors pretty damn well. So ultimately then thinking about this, well, number one, the lack of reviews, I think, is a genuine problem. And even though there's a load of great things in this story, even though like their CEO being quite refreshingly open about how the monetization is working and their principles, that stuff's great. But the review situation, absolutely, not good, right? Not good at all. Overall, though, it is nice that some of the more Bungie-like decisions don't seem to have been made here. I mean, whenever we heard that Bungie were very much advising on the other PlayStation Live services, you really would have worried that things will have got worse. Now, if this gets worse and worse over time, in terms of its monetization in the way that Destiny has, yes, we could have some sort of problem. But it does seem, for the scale of the team, the amount of investment into this game, that this is something that they're just kind of, happy with. Players, I think, are fairly happy with this. And if you want people to purchase war bonds, because that's what functionally, funds your game, well, I think the game's price point being reasonable at $40, that helps. And the war bond not expiring along with all the potential cosmetics and things, that also helps a great deal. I mean, certainly compared to the, you could say, overcharge and underdeliver of Bungie, this is a very refreshing thing. And looking at the other Sony plans, like with Concord, Fair Games, and some of the other things, if they are kind of going in the Helldivers direction, well, that's pretty damn good. And hey, see that like $30, $40 price tag? Man, it really does work. Like, we were talking about Assassin's Creed Mirage fairly recently. That was a $50 game, not a $70 game. Yes, it was a more contained experience, but that does actually seem to have worked for people, at least insofar as sales and revenue appear to go. You're looking at the likes of, say, Palworld and Enshrouded. And I think more and more you're just seeing that modern gamers are looking at the $70, and yes, you might get some more polish or some very expensive looking visuals, but in terms of just raw playability, it does seem that things sailing in at that lower price point are actually being rewarded by the market right now. So there you go. that is basically the situation. And I suppose if you want to reward what we're doing with the market, that was a kind of awkward segue, wasn't it? Over at bellular.ghost.io, that is where we have more and more. It's where you can get all of our content early and ad-free. We've got loading screen. Of course, we're all hanging out on the Members Lounge Discord on a daily basis as well. And of course, it is the number one way to actually make an impact here on what we're doing. Right now, the most immediate thing that I've been thinking in terms of using some of that funding is upgrades to sort of camera and show presentation for here. I kind of have a stage 1 of that planned out, and there'll be a quite a bit larger stage 2, I think, in the coming months. So that's the sort of things that I'm thinking on how it is actually making an impact to the show. Okay, that's it for me. Have a brilliant day. See you next time.